think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
I went digging through some of my old journal entries and found some that I had overlooked, so I'll read some of those on this episode. Most of them deal with a series of events which led up to the parasite extraction procedures, though some of these notes deal with things which I've already mentioned on this podcast, but since they go into further detail and were written soon after the events happened, I'll include them here. April 14th, 2014. The other night, microdosing on psilocybin, I decided to feel out my pantheon of toys, statues, and various other idols with a sort of touch-based impression deal I became aware of years ago, and later found out is apparently called psychometry. Though the psychometry I would do would be of a very mild level, psychometry apparently can be so powerful that people can read about people's past just by touching objects that they've had. My spirits previously told me that these fetishes, or useless pieces of plastic as so many haters call them, serve purposes much more important and spiritual than just sitting on your shelf and making people think that you're a nerd. I decided to attempt to feel the energies or impressions they apparently emanate. Some of what I felt was completely unsurprising, given the characters involved, but others turned out to give me very strong yet completely unexpected results. I have to mention how telling and sadly hilarious it is that Facebook is telling me that psilocybin and psychometry are non-existent words. April 15th, 2014. Psychometric impressions from toys. John Locke from Lost. I have never felt such determination. Determination raging over a layer of desperation. This one really hit me. I was in tears. Oh, and a bit of a spoiler alert here for people who haven't watched the entire series of Lost. It really reflected his character towards the end of his life. Okay, spoiler over. Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen. Wow, this was unexpected and quite unpleasant. I was expecting clarity, focus, power, something like that. What I got was a powerful force pushing me down to the ground. After asking my spirits about it, it apparently represents, or is parallel in some way to, being forced to go down on someone in a very rapey sort of way. They also said that what I was getting was coming from a spirit associated with or linked to the Dr. Manhattan toy, not necessarily a psychometric impression of the character, like I had gotten with the John Locke statue. Gotta remember to clear that naughty little fellow out from the Good Blue Doctor. April 16th, 2014. Psychometric impressions from toys and statues too. Alien Xenomorph, Facehugger, Prometheus Trilobite Engineers, Hammerblade Deacon. This entire terrible crew of dark elf death called bioweapons unsurprisingly emanated an extremely hostile, nasty essence. The thing which surprised me was that the black emanations seemed to be flowing from the others into the trilobite, and then spiraling outward from the beast's vagina blossom of a mouth. Predator from the movie Predator. I thought I would get something rather unpleasant from this alien hunter warrior. I was pleasantly surprised to feel very positive impressions of strength, honor, and excitement adrenaline. This intense badass guy was actually really nice to be around. Wow. Songbird from BioShock Infinite. This massive and mysterious steampunk cyborg from the phenomenal BioShock Infinite floored me with a wave of searing fury and relentless anger. This guy was pissed. Not very surprising at all, just very, very strong. Alduin the World Eater from Skyrim. There was a barrier of some sort around this guy. I could get nothing from a distance, and my spirits advised me not to even touch it. I later asked my spirits about it, and they said that they had put a sort of protective field around the black dragon because it was giving off something extremely powerful and nasty. Damn. April 18th, 2014. Last night, I asked my spirits if there were any toys that were of such a rotten nature that they just had to go. They responded strongly in the positive and pulled me over to a toy of one of the little sisters from BioShock. It felt like rotten filth. Oily horribleness just cascading out of it. Yeah, they told me that it was not representative of the characters from the game, that it was actually because of a nasty spirit that had decided to attach itself to that toy. They then pulled me towards a later variation of Malebolgia from Spawn. I just don't really dig on Spawn myself, but the toys are cool. I prefer Vertigo comics. Anyway, they said that negative spirits had been tied to those two toys and urged me to get them out of the apartment immediately. So I threw them out on the patio and closed the door. Later on that night, I noticed something on the floor. It turned out to be one of the horns from the Malebolgia toy. The horn had been affixed to that toy when I tossed it out on the patio and immediately shut the door. I also had not gone out to the patio since. The horn was also a considerable distance from the door to the patio, so I don't see how it could have bounced off the patio, shot through the narrow opening in the sliding glass door, and then made it all the way over there from the level of impact. I was barefoot also, so I don't think that I kicked it over there. I certainly would have noticed. I threw the offending horn back out on the patio. The next morning, I took them to Movie Trading Company because I know that they buy loose toys. When I was selling them to the guy there, he was baffled. He didn't want to say it, but I could tell that he was thinking, why the hell is this guy selling these toys to us here when he could certainly make 5 times as much from them on eBay? Well, price wasn't the issue. I just had to get those things away from me in my home. When I was standing in line to sell them behind a woman who brought a staggering pile of DVDs to sell, I could feel the horrible nastiness emanating from them so powerfully that I eventually had to just drop them on the floor and kick them over. With the trade-in credit, I got a very ugly but important toy. That space-time journeying reality-phasing guy from Star Trek Next Generation called the Traveler. He's that one where he shoots them across reality to places beyond space and says some extremely metaphysical stuff in that episode along the lines of reality truly being thought, not matter. April 21st, 2014. So, what started as psychometry experiments with toys has turned into, hell if I know what it's called, something else. Something completely beyond not only my expectations, but also my understanding of reality. Even within a very spiritual, non-materialist perspective, this is just wacko jacko. I've been debating with myself over whether or not I should post these experiences at all, and how to frame them if I did. I suppose I'll recount what's happened to me and leave the attempts at rationalization and explanation behind, because I'm honestly shocked and at a loss in that regard. I also need to preface this with the fact that I've been unwell in an energy body way for years now, and have been healing over time with help from my spirits, learning things about chakras and the energy body, cleaning up my apartment and reducing how much I drink. I've learned over time that I got in this state after being tormented by a very nasty being way back in 2003 to around 2007, although I had no idea what was going on at the time, before I made direct contact with spirits. No, that would be the kind of invisible guy that got on me, that tagged me. After that, in the 2009 to 2010 period, one of the spirits I would interact with was a confused negative one, which gradually vampirized me over time. More from being childish and demanding rather than deceptive and predatory. I got rid of it years ago. In fact, I'll get into detail on that story later. I, knowing nothing about the energy body because I saw it as New Age nonsense, would also suck the energy out of people, objects, animals, whatever. In addition to that, I unwittingly opened some kind of door to let in a constant stream of spirits unasked for and unwelcome, after flippantly and ignorantly experimenting with an Ouija board type method of communication. These nasty bastards would hag me and send me into spontaneous crippling panic attacks. I had no idea what was going on at the time. I was also drinking way too much, depriving myself of sleep, and rarely seeing daylight. The result of all this was the most terrifying, painful, and unholy period of my entire life. I truly thought that I was losing my mind in the most horrifying way. I can't tell you how much a snarky, cynical attitude towards these things has damaged me. If you're not going to take this stuff seriously, then stay the hell away and shut up. April 22nd, 2014. So this began when I touched the toy of the Angel of Death from Hellboy 2. I felt something come from the object and descend into my chest. I suspect the target was the chakra in my chest. I'm so uninformed about this stuff that I don't know what it's called, but that's where my energy body problems are focused. I felt something swirling around rapidly inside me like a vortex and imagined a storm of little reaper sickles dancing around my chakra. This reaper storm seemed to latch onto something inside me and pull it up and away from me as it ascended. My hand was then pulled away from the Angel of Death, his job done. Next, my hand went to the Traveler from Star Trek. This was really strange. My head was grabbed and then pulled back like a Pez dispenser. I felt something or someone descend down into my chest through the opening in my neck. Quote-unquote opening. My neck didn't actually split open physically. He then rooted around in there, did some fixing, then popped out of my neck and flipped my head back down. Okay. I discussed with my spirits, and they said that what was going on was a form of healing. One of Clive Barker's Tortured Souls toys, basically Cenobites without the copyright, pulled me over to it. I hesitated and asked my guide if it was okay, and he agreed. I felt that it was telling me that we had something in common. I didn't hear a voice or anything, just strong intuitions that seemed to come from without. He indicated the massive gash across his chest. And yes, my damaged chest chakra. He stressed that I wasn't just damaged, but had been savaged. Okay, the nasty spirits from the past. He then released me. And now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
At Point Lookout State Park in St. Mary's County, Maryland, Gerald J. Sword, who lived in the lighthouse from January 1973, was to hear many strange noises in its 20 rooms. Footsteps, crashes, furniture moving, doors opening and closing, and also voices. He would be woken at night by the chattering noise of numbers of people talking and would get up to trace the sound outdoors to the yard gate, from where it would move to another location and then on to another as he followed the sound. Each time this happened, the route the voices took was the same. There was nothing to be seen. During the Civil War, a prison camp was located in the area, and Mr. Sword wondered if the voices were those of sick and dying prisoners. He experienced many strange happenings in the lighthouse, including seeing a ghost, and when the ghostly activity was at its most lively, he would leave a tape recorder switched on. One unusual recording obtained in this way was of a female voice saying, "Let us not take any objections to what they are doing." A male voice was also heard singing. Psychic researchers who came to investigate the hauntings also captured unusual voices on tape, some of them having an apparent connection with the location. For instance, a vaccine spoken by a female voice in the former hospital area. "Fire if they get too close to you," said by a male voice on an old road where prisoners used to march. "Help me," and "bad shape" were also heard in the hospital area. In July 1924, a strange voice was being heard in a cemetery at Butler, New Jersey. On the 13th of July, an investigating committee of local citizens went into the cemetery late at night to look into reports that, for the past 10 nights, anyone who ventured past the cemetery or into the adjoining wood immediately was greeted by a voice that seemed to come from treetops, the ground, or the air overhead. The first witness was Police Patrolman Thomas Spring. He said when on the way home at midnight, a scream rang out from the top of a tree, followed by a lingering moan that ended abruptly in a cackle of wild laughter. When he looked up the tree, the voice seemed to drift high in the air and descend on another tree several yards beyond. Mr. Spring was astonished, but made no investigation. The voice was heard by many other people subsequently, and some heard threats or pleading cries for help. Mr. and Mrs. Roland Marcus of Butler were pursued along several miles of road by the voice. It was said the voice on this occasion prefaced his moaning by a loud cry of "help," followed by a warning of "look out" and a burst of demonic laughter. The voice seemed at times to belong to an invisible man on the road behind them, and at others to be suspended on a traveling wire overhead. Other inexplicable outdoor voices include the cries for help said to have come from a rock sticking out of Dongting Lake in the Hunan province of China. They may be the cries of drowning sailors, which have somehow been recorded in the rock and are played back when the conditions are right. A voice was heard in the cemetery at Arapahoe, Oklahoma, from 1972 onwards. It was immediately identified as that of the just buried George Smith. He was calling, "Oh no! Oh my God! Robina has not been saved!" He had never got over losing his 19-year-old daughter in a car accident in 1936, and the belief that she had died before achieving salvation haunted him for the rest of his life. He was buried next to his wife and daughter. Local people continued hearing his cries for years afterwards, including Cecil and Sharon Rutherford, who were decorating a grave in 1980 and heard a deep groan, then a deep masculine voice, very sorrowful, bawled that Robina hadn't been saved. They heard it again when about 50 feet from the Smith grave, but could see no sign of a prankster. The minister also heard the voice while holding another funeral service in the cemetery on 13th March 1979. Arthur Turcotte, a geologist who undertakes psychical research in his spare time, visited Arapahoe in search of a natural explanation and heard for himself the voice as it clearly spoke its message. On the farm of the Dag family at Clarendon near Shawville, Quebec, poltergeist phenomena broke out in the autumn of 1889. A ghost was seen taking varied forms, and it also spoke. As well as the local people, Percy Woodcock of Ontario, a successful artist who was also interested in the paranormal and came to investigate the happenings, also heard it. In fact, it spoke to him for several hours. The phenomenon seemed to center on 11-year-old Dinah, a girl who helped with the chores, but Woodcock was convinced that she, with her high-pitched voice, could not have faked the ghost's gruff voice. Many people gathered at the farm the next day, having heard that the ghost had promised to take its leave, and they all heard it, including a Baptist minister who attempted to exorcise it, whereupon it laughed and told him to stick to photography, his hobby. The voice showed intimate knowledge of everybody, and no one could see who might be faking it or how. Finally, it led the crowd on hours of hymn singing before departing for good. In Santa Fe in Argentina, in March 1984, falls of rocks and stones onto a house were accompanied by locked doors opening, screams, and cries of "Mother, Mother." A family in Hackettstown, New Jersey, experienced a great variety of poltergeist phenomenon during 1973 to 1976, including voices heard in the corner of a bedroom sounding like a group of men talking, though their words could not be discerned, and the sound of a female voice singing. In a poltergeist outbreak at Leesburg, Florida, which began in early 1978, unexplained voices were heard on the phone. A strange voice would interrupt a normal phone call, identify the person on the phone in the house, and give other relevant information, sometimes using bad language, as seems to be the habit of vocal poltergeists. In 1870, in the Bologna area of Italy, Blessed Clelia Barbieri was on her deathbed at the age of 23. She promised her 6 companions that she would never abandon them. Since her death, She has continued to join in the hymns and prayers of the sisters in their services in Italy, Africa, and India. In each of these countries, the local language is used, and Blessed Clelia's voice speaks each with a perfect pronunciation. The voice has even been heard by young novices who had no knowledge of the existence of the phenomenon and who, in fact, were frightened by it until the older sisters explained the background and promise of Blessed Clelia. Her voice is still heard today, as one of the sisters testifies, quote, "This voice never speaks alone, but joins in with the voices of the other nuns, almost as if she were present as a member of the community. I can testify to this feeling of a presence because I am personally among those who hear her and can state that when unexpectedly this voice is united to ours, it is sometimes happy and sometimes sad. It moves from one section of the church to another and really gives the impression that Blessed Clelia is present among us. There is a feeling of a presence which sometimes is so strong in me that I can hardly find the strength to continue because I am so moved. Not all the sisters hear the voice, and those who do are not the most saintly. The voice has also been heard by non-religious persons who at times did not know of the existence of this phenomenon." In Caracas, Venezuela, on November 28, 1954, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Gustavo Gonzalez and Jose Ponce left town in their flat-panel truck to buy foodstuffs in Petare, 20 minutes away. Soon afterward, they encountered a luminous sphere 8 to 10 feet in diameter that nearly blocked the roadway. It hovered just 6 feet above the ground. As Gonzalez stopped the truck and the two got out to investigate, a little hairy man approached them. Gonzalez immediately grabbed him, intending to take him to the police. To his surprise, Gonzalez found the little man extremely light, weighing only about 35 pounds. His body was very hard and covered with stiff, bristly hair. The little man gave Gonzalez a push with one clawed hand and sent him flying about 15 feet. Ponce, who was Gonzalez's helper, became frightened and ran to the police station located a short distance away. As he departed, he noticed two other little men emerging from the bushes. They were carrying either rocks or chunks of dirt in their arms as they hopped aboard an opening in the side of the sphere. Meanwhile, the first hairy little man, eyes aglow and claws extended, attacked Gonzalez. Pulling out his knife, Gonzalez stabbed the creature in the shoulder, but the knife glanced off as if the shoulder were made of steel. Then another little man emerged from the sphere and shot a beam of light from a small tube, momentarily blinding Gonzalez. When the two little men climbed back aboard, the sphere took off rapidly. Gonzalez arrived at the police station shortly after Ponce. The two were suspected of being drunk, but an examination revealed otherwise. Gonzalez was found to have a long red scratch on his side. The two were given sedatives. Several days later, a doctor came forward, admitting that he had seen the fracas with the creatures, but that he had left the scene, as he did not want to be involved in undesired publicity. A Clarksburg, Maryland resident on Friday said he saw an entity without a body, with just a pair of legs. The anonymous man claims he was hiking on the east side of Mount Pearl near Clarksburg when he noticed the anomalous sighting. "2 legs is all I saw. The only sound I remember was the sound of me going down the mountain," he recalled about the purported biped. The eyewitness says the legs looked like those of an elk and that he expected to see a complete animal but was shocked to see just the 2 legs walking. "I was stunned. I had to take a few moments to reevaluate what I saw in case I had mistaken something for these legs." He added that he was looking for the creature but was unable to locate it. The subject simply described the legs as very tall and elk-like. "They crossed my path." Last month, a Pennsylvania man also reported a similar event at MUFON where 2 large gray legs were walking across a path. A former Michigan state trooper says he regularly sees and feeds Bigfoot-like creatures in the Cascade Range of Washington state. The 64-year-old man, who provided a full name and state trooper badge number but asked to remain anonymous, told Cryptozoology News on Tuesday that he has been seeing the creatures since 2010. "It usually happens at night, 3 o'clock a.m., but sometimes during the day," he claims. The sightings, he adds, frequently last hours as the creatures follow him. "They follow me now when in the area, after I have left them food. They always follow uphill in my blind spot like a soldier does. Sometimes they just stand away from me and look at me." The former law enforcement officer says he speaks to them in a language similar to Native American Salish. "This last time there were 3 other people with me. Heard whoops, then large rock lands 40 feet away from us, then brush crashing. Then one individual 7 feet tall, 100 feet away looking over 3 fall. Others with me observed that one. I approached and spoke in Native American Salish. 'Come here, friend.' A female individual stepped from behind a tree 30 feet from me, looked at me, then smiled shyly and stepped back behind the tree," the man said. The alleged female primate, he explains, was approximately 6 feet tall and weighing around 200 pounds. It reportedly had dark hair on a human face, medium female breasts with light gray skin around that area, and dark fingernails. She smiled at me and had very white teeth. He also claims that he feeds them different types of food such as candy bars and fruit. "I do not seek them. I only furnish them some food when in their area, so they will leave me alone. I do not want any problems with them, only a relationship based on mutual respect for each other. They seem very intelligent, and I have heard them speak to each other a couple of times." When Cryptozoology News asked about the photographic evidence, the man said that these creatures are very shy, and hide as soon as he brings out a camera. "If you hold up anything in front of your face, they will hide. but the former trooper says he now has small equipment that he can attach to his clothes and will be trying to get footage of the unproven creatures soon. I'm trying to get them to come to my camp and attempt to communicate up close to them. If I'm able to do that, then I will be able to capture it on video, he says. When I am alone, they are close. When others are with me, they stay 75 to 100 feet away. Females come the closest to me. They like some people and some they do not. 2 people claim to have seen an unidentified, transparent, flying creature in northwest England. The 49-year-old woman, Jo Ann Matthews, told Cryptozoology News that she was dropping her granddaughter off at her home in Runcorn when they saw the odd creature last Wednesday evening. It was a very clear night. Both myself and granddaughter noticed the constellations, Orion's belt, etc. We then noticed something moving slowly across the sky, higher than a plane. The weird thing was that it was the same color as the sky. Its wings, she explained, were flapping, adding that as the reason they were able to differentiate its shape in the sky. It was physically moving. It was my granddaughter who said it was a Pegasus, as its shape and movement looked like it. The woman described the creature as having large protrusions on both sides of its body. To see this clearly, it must have been huge. It had a head and body shape and looked like it was flying, said Matthews. On August 23, 1954, at Lugrin, near Thonon, France, Elise Blanc approached an object looking like an aluminum trailer with 2 small beings in silvery dress, grunting like pigs, standing close by. The craft took on a fiery color and flew away. On August 27, 1954, at 20:30 hours, at Boston Creek, Canada, a wingless flying object was seen by Bill Supa, an employee of the Caswell Construction Company. It landed about 2 kilometers away from the witness, who approached within 300 meters before it took off and flew away. Grass was flattened where it had landed. On August 28, 1954, in Quebec, Canada, 2 boys saw a craft land and 2 or 3 men come out. No details given. On August 30, 1954, at 05:25 hours, in North Bay, Canada, Sergeant Dirtle saw a brilliant circular object flying across Lake Nipissing toward the Royal Canadian Air Force Base. An oblong canister was hanging down from a central section, which supported a long cone with a spinning globe on top. When it tilted, the witness was able to observe regulator-like devices inside the machine through a vertical lighted slit. 6 brilliant appendages, which looked like necklaces, were hanging from the craft. Dirtle woke up 4 Air Force men who observed the object spiraling away. On September 3, 1954, in Souk el-Khamis in Tunisia, many workers in the fields 12 kilometers south of the town saw an object apparently made of transparent plastic fly over the houses, stop on edge, and swing like a pendulum a few meters above the ground. It made several erratic jumps, then resumed its horizontal position and flew away. On September 7, 1954, at 07:15 hours, between Harpenville and Conte in France, 2 bricklayers, Emile Reynard, 27, and Yves de Guillerbals, 23, saw an object floating in midair over a field. It looked like an unfinished haystack, with a plate turned upside down on top of it. When they approached, it took off. Diameter 10 meters, height 3 meters. A kind of door was noticed. The observation lasted over 3 minutes. The object released smoke when it departed. Now some strange events in Finland. In Helsinki, large numbers of coins materialized inside house, falling onto parquet floor, autumn 1917 or 1918. Also, ghost of former president spoke to 2 women, 19th April 1957. Ah, that was in the last episode. Party in apartment visited by ghost of former resident who spoke to witness, 12th February 1977. In Imjärvi, 2 men out skiing saw UFOs slowly descending and sending out beam of light, in which stood an entity 3 feet tall and very thin. It directed a pulsating light at one man, then a thick red-gray mist and colored sparks came from the UFO, hitting the men. The mist was so thick they could see nothing, and when it cleared, the UFO was gone. The men were ill for some time afterwards, 7th January 1970. In Kursu, Sala, man saw UFO outside backwoods cabin, then inside room. The door was closed. An entity stood in helmet and shimmering clothes with big eyes. They talked about Apollo 13 before entity disappeared through wall, 15th April 1970. At Lake Lokusa, at Taivalkoski, white lake monster, first seen autumn 1958. At Pleranen Island, near Turku, sightings of sea monster around the island, June 1978. Near Pudasjärvi, woman driving on country road entered strange fog and saw domed UFO with portholes. She was taken inside for examination and received message supporting peace and opposing war, 2nd April 1980. At Sakia Lake, near Linkipoya, 10 by 8 foot hole appeared in ice and lights seen in sky, 8th December 1983. At Giryo Kanto, near Sikasalo, farmers split open aspen log felled several months before and found dried fish like a perch over 16 inches long in rotten hollow with no clue how it got there, October 1969.
What the hell in God's name is going down?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out.
April 23rd, 2014. I have one of those life-size cardboard standees of Hugh, the friendly Borg from Star Trek The Next Generation. When I touched it, I felt something beam out from the head and penetrate my skull. To my bafflement and surprise, I perceived that it was a scanning beam of some kind which was coming out of his hologram eye. I could feel him standing there inside and behind the standee. The beam wasn't coming from the cardboard object, but from a presence I felt standing there. I was pulled to my giant xenomorph toy, that's the monster from Alien. When I touched it, I felt the presence behind it and could begin to see a strong impression in my mind's eye of the beautiful black beast pressing its eyeless face to mine. I felt a rather nauseous and frightful feeling radiating from it. It started getting really intense and vicious in its manner, and I was a bit shocked and dumbstruck when it began grunting. I swear to God, it was grunting in an angry, halting way, seeming to say something like chop, 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 chop. This chopping sequence grew in intensity and fury until it pulled its head back, opened its jaws wide, and let out an absolutely piercing xenomorph shriek that was accompanied by blinding white light bursting forth from it. I felt something pushed out from me by the shriek and white light. It's interesting to note that in none of the Alien movies does it make that sound. April 24th, 2014. I've been having many amazing experiences these past couple of days doing this toy channeling business. I've begun invoking before and banishing after each session. For the sake of space, I'll share just a few of the many additional experiences I've had. I have a hollow glass mannequin type head which I put an orange light inside. When my hands were on that, I started getting thrashed around violently to the point where I knocked my vinyls of Bowie's Low and 9 Inch Nails' The Fragile off the table. This made me pull away and stop the process. My guide indicated that it was okay, and then I strongly perceived a presence come from where the head was. They were a bald humanoid of average height, wearing a type of gown or robe. I also perceived that they were female. She bowed down a little and made gestures of forgiveness, assuring me that the intensity of the experience was not harmful. I decided to take the glass head off the table and sit with it in the middle of the floor so that any further thrashing about would not mess anything else up. I continued interacting with her and, letting myself go, realized that the thrashing was actually her gripping my head and moving it around, up, down, left, right, like someone inspecting me, looking for something. I got the strong impression of being examined by a doctor, to the point of, feeling that trying not to giggle even though the doctor's tickling you sensation. Her movements of my head would intensify, like she was narrowing in on what she was looking for, which seemed to be attempting to escape her. Eventually, she seemed to have gotten it, and I felt her pulling something out of me that was resisting, trying to dig back into me. Eventually, it snapped out and was cast away outside of the area I had designated as a ritual zone. I thanked her and asked her name, which she gave me. She then pulled me to a book I have about Mars mysteries, pyramids and ruins on Mars and such. She responded that she is a living being, but a spirit being, not a physical person projecting herself. In a further healing session, she pulled me close to her and we kissed. She radiated amazing amounts of love and happiness. She's really quite sublime. Is she a spirit from Mars? I don't know. As confounding and as impossible as it seems, that's what she comes across as.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
This article is called Homeland Security Camera Records 2 UFOs in Puerto Rico. It was posted on June 3rd, 2014 to openminds.tv by Jason McClellan. A video that was allegedly obtained from sources inside a Puerto Rican federal agency shows 2 UFOs over western Puerto Rico. The video was reportedly shot by an infrared camera aboard a Homeland Security helicopter in the Puerto Rican city of Aguadilla in the early morning hours of April 26, 2013. This video was uploaded to YouTube by Jose Martinez, a member of the Puerto Rican research group. He explains that the video was shot by a helicopter from Rafael Hernandez International Airport, which was formerly a United States Air Force base called Ramey Air Force Base. Several federal agencies are currently housed at the Rafael Hernandez International Airport. According to the website Historias Ufológicas en Puerto Rico y el Exterior, quote, in the video you can see how the object moves very quickly. In one part of the video, you can see how the object is thrown to the sea at extreme speed, end quote. And when it comes back out of the sea, there are, quote, 2 objects on the screen, end quote. Researchers reportedly conferred with authorities from the Puerto Rico Joint Forces of Rapid Action, or FURA, a division of the State Police of Puerto Rico that coordinates operations between Puerto Rico police and U.S. federal agencies. These authorities confirmed that the UFO video was taken by a camera aboard a Black Hawk helicopter. The website asserts that, quote, this proves that federal agencies in Puerto Rico have knowledge of the presence of ovnis extraterrestre and surveillance in the hottest areas of Puerto Rico are being monitored, end quote.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called Some Scientific Facts About Crop Circles That Nobody Really Knows About. It was posted to collectiveevolution.com on February 8th, 2016 by Arjun Walia. Crop circles have been appearing around the globe for a very long time, and while some might represent the sloppy and obvious work of a few pranksters, others are so elaborate, so clever, so intricate, and so meaningful that their creation would require the use of highly advanced technology. It's truly difficult to imagine how some of these designs could be done in the dead of night, with no footprints left behind in just a few hours of time. It's a quote from Richard Dolan, historian, academic author, and one of the world's leading UFO researchers. Some of these formations are so immense and complex as to defy reason, and after all these decades, none of the perpetrators have been caught in the act of making any of the truly extraordinary formations. The circles that are most likely to be genuine have actually been being studied by reputable scientists from all over the world for decades. For example, Richard Taylor, a University of Oregon physicist, published a paper on them in the 2011 issue of Physics World, stating, "Crop circle arts are not going to give up their secrets easily. This summer, unknown artists will venture into the countryside close to your homes and carry out their craft, safe in the knowledge that they are continuing the legacy of the most science-oriented art movement in history." Yes, you read that correctly, the most science-oriented art movement in history. What would cause a physicist to conclude that these works do not have an extraterrestrial explanation, or to even consider the issue seriously? An 800-foot crop circle appeared in Wiltshire, England in 2001. It caused a lot of commotion, and as you can see, it was very beautiful and extremely complex. The design consisted of 409 circles that form what's known as a triskelion, a symbol that dates back thousands of years. There is some great footage of it in the documentary Crop Circles: Quest for Truth by Academy Award-winning director William Gazetsky. Quote from somebody in that video, "It was so large that it took us half an hour to find the center." There are some more great images of it in a YouTube video. You can also see footage of it taken by a helicopter flying above from the documentary Thrive. This circle marks just one of thousands of verified formations that continue to baffle scientists, researchers, and onlookers alike. Richard Taylor, the aforementioned scientist who studied these circles, again expressed his belief that this was one of the greatest art revolutions in history when he published his scientific analysis of crop circles in the journal Nature in 2010. After studying the affected grass in the lab, he concluded that the circle makers must be using GPS devices, lasers, and microwaves to create these designs because the nodes of some of the stalks have been blasted out on one side. The same effect has been replicated by a highly localized microwave heating, which is what causes the stalks to flop over to one side. While he was able to come up with a scientifically feasible explanation for this phenomenon, he fails to address how hoaxers could come into possession of such advanced technology. It's clear that there would be no other way to make some of these circles, so what's really going on here? Quote from Richard Dolan, "If something like this has caused the formations, then we are clearly talking about a highly sophisticated agency behind the phenomenon. Did you know that the electromagnetic field over the area where a circle appears is usually electrostatically charged? Or that there is a rare form of electromagnetic energy called an ionized plasma vortex, also known as ball lightning, involved in these formations? Studies published in scientific journals have tried to come up with explanations that differ from unknown or extraterrestrial. For example, Dr. Terence Maiden, a professional physicist, meteorologist, and archaeologist at the University of Oxford, said that these balls of light are a result of wind currents and ionized plasmas. Whatever the case may be, the fact that scientists are taking note should signal that this phenomenon is worth our attention." Another quote from Richard Dolan, "The patterns of the formations themselves have been studied endlessly. Aside from being supremely beautiful, many seem to be messages in one form or another, often with cosmological implications. None seem ominous or evil. If one receives any sense or feeling from them, it is benevolence. If it were to be the case that these formations are created by an extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence, we may conclude that at least one of the groups here might in fact care about us and wish to help us." So the next time somebody tells you about a crop circle, perhaps you should think twice before brushing it off as a hoax.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article is called "The Accidental Shaman," and it was posted to realitysandwich.com in March 2017. It's by Howard G. Charing, published by Inner Traditions. It was a beautiful spring day in 1983. I was on vacation with Shelley, my wife, in Verona at the Piazza Bra, drinking an espresso and admiring the ancient Roman amphitheater. This is where we met Aaron. I was drinking my coffee when I suddenly heard a loud commotion. Looking behind me, I could see people crowding around a man who was clearly having a seizure. It was as if an invisible pile driver was pounding his body into the ground. His body was moving down with massive staccato jolts. His convulsing body was surrounded by a mass of people who were making a lot of noise in their distress. Police officers joined the bystanders, but seemed unable to offer any assistance. As I sat watching this drama, I heard a man at an adjacent table express his disapproval of the scene. I turned around and gestured with my arms up and hands open to indicate a kind of helplessness with the situation. He looked at me with a probing but not unfriendly intensity, and then he very politely asked in perfect English if he could join us at our table. We said, "Yes, please do." We shook hands and introduced ourselves as he sat with us. He had a dignified appearance, this man in his mid to late 40s with grayish-white hair and suntanned olive skin. This was Aaron, a man who had changed my life. I asked him why he was angry. He turned and pointed to the scene. The collapsed man by now had a swarm of people around him. The police were finally starting to get a grip on the situation and were pushing people back to enable the man to have some breathing and recovery space. Aaron said, I am angry because there is a doctor at one of the tables, but he does not want to get involved. I asked, how do you know this? He then drew his chair closer and studied me, and I felt as if I was being scrutinized. He started to speak, and for the next hour I sat transfixed as if I was in the grip of a magical enchantment. He told me about my life, my dreams, my hopes, and my dark and painful experiences. It was as if I had become an open book, and my inner secrets were being revealed page by page. The background noise faded away, and unexpressed emotions began welling up from within me. Tears rolled down my face. He paused for a moment and signaled to a waiter for more coffee while I attempted to regroup and assimilate what had happened. We sat for a few moments in silence and drank our coffee as I tried to recover my former confident and relaxed composure. He then said, our meeting was not simply chance. I am one of the most well-known psychic healers in Italy. He expanded his arms. People come from all over Europe to consult me for healing. He pointed at me and said, you. It looked as if he was searching for a word, and then he continued, are a very good person and will be doing the same work that I am doing. The coffee had enabled me to get my composure back, and I quickly dismissed this. He looked at me with a stern expression and responded, this is a serious matter. I do not make jokes about this. As I was absorbing this, he said, I will now give you a blessing. He placed his hand on the top of my head and spoke softly in Italian. As he was making his blessing, my body felt like a cauldron with liquid fire burning within and moving upward. Waves of energy pulsated through me. An intense heat flowed from my spine, up through my head and down to my shoulders, along my arms and into my hands, which now felt as if they were red hot. Shelley was watching this exchange with total incredulity and said, this is nonsense! Aaron looked at her and gently replied, you will be presenting Howard with a baby. Shelley burst into tears and didn't say a further word. She was no longer skeptical because we had been trying for a while to start a family. Later, he invited us to dinner with his family and gave us a wonderful tour of Verona, complete with a visit to the balcony of the Casa di Giulietta that recreates the romance of Romeo and Juliet. Before we took our leave of each other, he presented us with gifts, including bottles of wine. His final words were, our work with you is done, and we fondly said our farewells. A week later, I was back in London at my place of business. I entered the elevator and pushed the button to go up. Suddenly, my stomach flew into my mouth and an enormous force began crushing me. The lift was out of control and plummeting at great speed. I knew without a shred of doubt that then and there I was going to die. As soon as I realized this, I was gone, out and away, soaring from my body, which became infinitesimal as I receded into the distance. Then I was somewhere, disembodied in an indescribable other place. This place pulsed with colored waves of light, and I knew that I had to make a decision, to either live or die, and I decided not to die. As soon as I made a decision to live, I was soon back in my physical body. Time stopped for me, and the world stood still. I found myself calmly looking down at my body, and it felt as if I had all the time in the world. I thought I must be able to do something. I tried jumping up, something that I had seen in the Roadrunner cartoons, but I couldn't move upward. The law of gravity did not permit that. And then suddenly I knew with total certainty precisely what to do. I got into a crouch position, took out my handkerchief, and shoved it into my mouth. The elevator crashed, and I experienced the shock of impact, although I felt no pain because I was momentarily knocked unconscious. I came to lying face down, unable to move. The lift appeared to be rising slowly, and the door automatically opened. People were gathered outside. I later found out that the crash had been heard all over the building, and I was carried out to an ambulance and taken to a hospital. My life from that moment on was never the same. Recovery was a slow, painful, and uncomfortable process. Whereas before I had been active in sports, working out at the gym, running, keeping fit, and so on, I was now unable to stand up. My knees had been compressed and couldn't support my body weight. I had to wear a large, uncomfortable orthopedic collar around my neck because my neck had been fractured and could no longer support the weight of my head. My lower back was crushed. My jaw was still sore from the impact, but if I hadn't stuffed a handkerchief in my mouth, I would most certainly have chopped my tongue off with my teeth, as at the moment of impact, the lower jaw smashed into the upper jaw. I realized that if I hadn't gone into a crouch to absorb the shock through my body, I would have been killed by the fracture of my spine. How I knew exactly what actions to take was an intriguing mystery. It wasn't as if I had an emergency contingency plan for elevator crashes. Over the next following months, I was in a lot of pain and experienced great feelings of despondency, resentment, and bitterness. I became vacant, absent from life, and I occupied myself by sitting down and looking out the window. I remember spending entire days gazing out during the autumn, watching leaves fall from the trees, studying the patterns they made, observing how they were rustled and blown about by the wind to form new patterns. Of course, other things were going on as well. I was being seen by top-notch doctors and receiving all the other benefits that my company medical insurance provided, but the prognosis was always the same. Sorry, nothing we can do. It will take time. During these difficult months, a friend suggested that I see an alternative healer. I thought, why not? I have nothing else to do. The sessions I had with this therapist were pleasant, and I found them to be relaxing and helpful. The therapist used a mixture of bodywork, massage, and energy healing. This went on for a few months until one day, as I was lying on this massage couch, an unusual glaze came into his eyes, and he began speaking in a noticeably different voice. He had suffered from a stroke, and his speech since that event had been slurred, but this time it was eloquent and sonorous. He asked, Howard, do you want to become well again? I was stunned by this question and somehow couldn't get an answer. I had to struggle with it. Do I really want to get well? Finally, after what seemed like a long time, I replied, yes, I do want to. I realized that I had become used to feeling feeble and embittered, and had not even considered that I would really recover. Then, still in his unusual calm voice, he said, Howard, forgive all the people that you blame for the accident. Okay, I thought, I can do this. So I closed my eyes, gathered myself, concentrated with all the force I could muster, and said, I forgive all those people that I blame for the accident. At that exact moment, it felt as if a great heavy mountain started to lift from me. I felt light, even weightless. I only became aware of this massive weight on me as it dissipated. It was an incredible experience. When I looked back at him, the glaze from his eyes had gone, and he looked confused. What happened? He asked. Something came over me, and I don't understand it. I told him what had taken place. I was baffled and concerned that he didn't remember. This was definitely a bit weird. Nevertheless, I felt so much different, uplifted, and clearer. Over the next week, in this excited and elated state, I, of course, overexerted myself and subsequently strained my body, and I was back to lying down in bed and to recover. As I lay resting, I placed my hands on my chest for comfort, and within seconds, waves of sensation pulsed and washed through me, and the pain went away. The next day, I was again in pain, lying down, and the same thing happened. This went on for about a week, and then it dawned on me that when I placed my hands on my body, the pain disappeared like it was being flushed away. Immediately following this realization, I felt a kind of fuzziness around me, extending about 6 inches from my body. It was not unlike a low electric current. I could also see iridescent, translucent streamers emanating from my fingers when I touched this field of fuzziness. I started to experiment and found that this invisible fuzziness was around everything. It could be touched and was malleable. I used to make up balls of this electric fuzziness and play ping pong, bouncing it off the ceiling and walls, catching it and throwing it again. Apart from these small and entertaining diversions, the most important matter was that I was making real progress. I could feel that I was getting well. The pain was considerably easier and my back was becoming increasingly more flexible. The hardness in my back progressively changed from feeling like a heavy slab of concrete to that of a softer and more yielding material. Bit by bit, I could increasingly move my back and bend down, and I didn't need to wear the collar anymore. Even my knees could bend, and I was overjoyed at achieving the ability to walk up a slope. During this period of healing, I experienced some unusual encounters. I remember one night lying in bed asleep, and I kept hearing a voice whispering repeatedly, "Howard, wake up," directly into my ear. I woke up, and there in front of me was something like an illuminated cinema screen floating in the air. As my eyes focused on the screen, I could see a group of Tibetan monks dressed in red and saffron robes smiling and enthusiastically waving at me. I was amazed by this wonderful vision, and I really enjoyed it. Then the voice spoke again. "Watch carefully. This is what you have to do, and we will show you exercises that will help your back to get well." Then the scene changed, and the Tibetan monks all lay on their backs and showed me a set of exercises to get my injured back healed. When this was done, they gathered again and with beautiful and warming smiles gently waved goodbye. The floating screen faded away and disappeared. Needless to say, I followed their instructions, and they really helped. It took 2 years before I could really resume my life, go back to work, and generally get out and about. In the meantime, I helped a friend with his chronic back pain. I found that I was able to work with this fuzzy field to release pain, very much like I had done with myself. Gradually, through word of mouth, people started to see me for healing. It was an unusual experience because I focused on the person, I experienced a sense of uplifting and heightened awareness, and I found that as I held an image of the person in my thoughts and saw that individual becoming well, strong, and healthy again, the person experienced a positive reaction. If a person who had a bad back came to me, I would visualize the back becoming strong, firm, straight, and supple. And without a single word taking place between us, the person's back would kind of unroll and become straight. I didn't understand the mechanism at work or what was going on, but I did have a strong desire to find out more, so I decided to explore this strange thing that was going on within and around me. I used the term thing because at that stage I had no understanding of what was happening to me. All I knew was that it worked. During this transient developmental period, all kinds of unexpected phenomena took place. I became increasingly more conscious of the field of energy around me, and one day I became aware of what I can only describe as a thick steel band clamped around my forehead. The more I focused on it, the more it constricted. It felt alive. The pressure on my head became so tight that my forehead began to ache. I knew that I had to remove whatever was causing the constriction. It took about an hour of intense concentration, and I was sweating so hard that it felt like physical exertion, but gradually I was able to weaken the metal-like band particle by particle and get leverage, and then slowly, very slowly, I wrenched the clamp off my forehead. As soon as this was released, the room filled with dazzling, flashing sparks of color. Colors blazed everywhere. The whole room vibrated and shimmered with stunning hues. The experience was so intense that I had to go outside and walk to the local park to get some air. However, as I moved, this luminescent vision grew even more vivid. I could see pulsating, radiant flecks dancing around people, but this flow of color was not only around people. When I arrived at the park and looked at the trees, I saw an iridescent glow surrounding them. I was totally mesmerized by this astounding experience, and after spending some time wandering around the park, enjoying this exciting display, I made my way home. When I arrived at my house and sat down, I saw a beautiful, scintillating, glowing pink cloud. This pink cloud approached me, and I heard soft, gentle words inside my head that said, "Peace." I felt a glow of warmth and happiness, and the pink cloud gently flowed into me. I had never felt such warmth, friendship, and love. Love cascaded and streamed through and around me, reaching out far beyond. The only way I can describe it is as if I had been touched by an angelic presence. After all this, my perception expanded in new directions. When I looked at a person, I saw shapes and forms around them. When a person came to me for healing, I saw animals around them. These animals could communicate with me. Sometimes they showed me images, and other times I would hear their words whispering in my ear. They would tell me about the person, the cause of the illness, and the practice or medicine that would be helpful to that individual. At times I felt that I was becoming very unbalanced, even crazy, yet what kept me on the ground and held me together was the fact that it worked. I had absolutely no frame of reference to explain what was happening to me. I also started to encounter the darker negative forces that abound. One episode that had stayed in my mind concerns an old friend with whom I had been out of contact for many years. For the sake of anonymity, I'll refer to him as John. He asked me to help him with his severe migraine headaches. The migraine attacks were so vicious that he was often laid low for days on end. It is relevant to note that he had become a heavy cocaine user and had gone into dealing as a way to finance his habit. One day we sat down together to work on his migraine. Just as I started to move into the receptive, meditative, visionary space, I was suddenly punched hard on my forehead. The force knocked me off my stool and I fell onto the floor. I didn't see it coming, and I asked John, "Why did you do that?" He looked at me in total surprise and said, "I didn't do anything." I felt very unsettled and disturbed by what had happened. My forehead was sore, and in the mirror I could see bruising coming up the location where I had been struck. I told John that I needed to rest and that we could follow up at another time. I asked him to leave. As soon as he went, I had to lie down. I felt extremely weak and unwell. The situation got worse day by day, and I felt that I was fading away. I had no energy, and it was a struggle to get up. Doing basic everyday chores was exhausting. I was listless and depleted of energy. After a few days of this fatigue, I again brought all my focus and attention into my body. In my mind, I saw every organ, every gland, and every system in my body become alive and pulse with energy. After doing this for hours, I needed a break and went downstairs to make a cup of tea. As I was sitting down, I felt a strange feeling, a kind of vibrating, murmuring sensation at the base of my spine that grew and grew in intensity. Suddenly, it was like a volcanic explosion, with red-hot lava shooting up along my spine and then all through my body. I couldn't move. It was as if I was paralyzed, glued to the chair. I could see and feel waves and bands of light swirling around me. This continued until late at night, when suddenly, with a mighty whooshing noise, all this hot lava-like energy shot out the soles of my feet and into the ground with such force that my legs were thrown up in the air. I had been purged of every trace of the junk that had been punched into me. The kundalini energy at the base of my spine had erupted. As soon as this purging was complete, the glowing pink cloud appeared again and flew back into me through my forehead. I felt fully restored and again had that deep experience of bliss and love. A force outside of my conscious self had intervened and saved my ass. I knew then that it was not John who had attacked me, but something with him, or more precisely, something put on him. As I sat down to reflect on this, a strange apparition materialized in the room. It had the appearance of a snake with the head of a lion. The snake came closer and paused in front of me. I knew that this was an ally, a helper, a protector, and most important of all, a friend. I didn't know how I knew this, I just felt it. I reached out and stroked the furry lion mane, and it spoke to me, saying that it was a guardian and necessary for the work I was doing. I realized that I needed all the help that I could get. Well, back to this thing with John. A couple of days later, he called me and asked again if I could help him with his migraine. We arranged a time, and he came around. He sat down on the chair, and I looked at him, but this time with considerably more wariness, and I saw what appeared to be a steaming pile of excrement on top of his head. As I continued to study this, I saw sparks and tendrils of light being drawn from him into this pile of excrement. This thing was feeding off him. Gingerly, I extended my hands and lifted this putrid substance off his head. The substance felt very slimy and repugnant, and I put it on the floor and quickly stepped back. Instantly, it grew into a shadowy, amorphous mass towering above me. I was very alarmed by this and didn't know what to do. I felt great apprehension, and then I remembered the lion-headed snake that had been recently introduced to me, so I called this guardian to help. There was a blinding flash, and the dark, shapeless mass vanished. All that remained was the pungent odor of sulfur and burnt meat. John was looking at me very strangely. He said he saw a flash of light and asked where the smell was coming from. I told him what had happened and made it clear this obscene thing had been drawn to him by his use of cocaine. He looked so different. His face had become younger, with the lines smoothed out, and his expression glowed. He was delighted that the migraine headache had vanished. I suggested that he look at himself in the mirror, which he did, and he returned with a great big grin on his face. John, unfortunately, did not stop or reduce his cocaine usage, and a few months later the migraines returned with a vengeance. He contacted me and asked for help. I treated him again, albeit with a lot more awareness on my part, and this relieved him. But this cycle didn't end, and I regretfully realized that unless he made the decision to stop, all the time and effort would be fruitless. I also didn't appreciate having this nauseating, obnoxious mess brought into my house. I saw John again a couple of times over the next months, and he had changed. He looked as if he was being consumed. His face was drawn, and he had lost a lot of weight. He had a very negative and aggressive attitude, and there was no way I could reach him or offer any support. It was time to break contact, which I did, and over the next few days he left sinister messages on my answering machine. Whatever had got him, had him. The experiences with John had taught me a lot. I clearly saw the effects of hard drug use and extreme negative thoughts in a different way. I became less naive and knew that there were tangible energies out there. Some were benign and helpful, some not so benign. I understood that our practices and attitudes act like magnetic forces drawing those energies to us, and in turn they are able to influence us. It was an awareness of the dreamer dreaming the dream, and then the dream dreaming the dreamer. On this theme and around this time, I had another important teaching, one that I have endeavored to fulfill to this day. It was a direct teaching by these invisible beings. This teaching was not fluffy. It was made difficult due to my innate stubborn streak because I felt like I was being reprogrammed. I found that if I had a negative or unpleasant thought about a person, my head immediately felt as if it was being crushed in a vice, and it was painful. The pain would stay with me for hours afterward. If, however, I had a positive enhancing thought about someone, I felt a wonderfully warm glow flush through my body, which left me in a virtual state of bliss. I knew that these actions were being imposed on me from outside of myself, and I absolutely resented this. I saw it as an imposition on my free will. If I wanted to be unpleasant, that's my business. I confess that I resisted this as much as I could, even though I knew deep within that the purpose was aimed at making me a better person. However much I tried, I couldn't prevent it, and eventually I realized that I had to seriously change my attitude and become aware of the nature of my thoughts. What really upset me most about this whole affair was that it gave my well-developed ego a hell of a bashing. I was being trained by these incorporeal beings or spirits in exactly the same way that donkey is trained using the carrot and the stick, except that in this scenario I was the donkey. They certainly have a good sense of humor. So I sat down and considered a way to resolve this and figured out that I had no choice but to discipline my thoughts. I had the notion to place a metaphorical thought supervisor in my mind. This supervisor had the appearance of a traditional British policeman in uniform and helmet holding a truncheon. His task was to inspect my thoughts before they were transmitted. This entailed stopping the negative and disharmonious thoughts and transforming them into gentle and gracious thoughts before they were broadcast into the world. As this function started to work, I no longer suffered from the vice-like pain. After a period of time, I was no longer even aware of the presence of this policeman. Positive thinking had become natural and ingrained in me. Even now, when I'm really tempted to have an unkind or aggressive thought about a person, I have to dissipate the thought itself and replace it with an amiable or neutral thought. I had figured out that thoughts have power, that they are a form of energy that can influence reality and have an effect on people. This is not a fallacy by any means, and I'm not proposing anything out of the ordinary here, as you yourself may have had experiences of manifesting in the world what you are thinking, whether positive or negative. The fundamental premise is that our thoughts are vibrational waves that connect to energy on the same wavelength, thus drawing people or events to us that are on a similar wavelength. Although this concept is not scientific per se, there is sufficient anecdotal evidence to suggest not rejecting it out of hand. Subjective events are hard to measure, and one of the greatest challenges of quantum science is explaining the phenomenon of the observer influencing the experiment simply through the act of observing. I found that another benefit of managing my thoughts was that it stopped me from being reactive in difficult situations and provided an opportunity to be brutally honest with myself as to why I wanted to react and why I felt the way I did. Where did those feelings come from? Often they came from a sense of being hurt or offended by another person. I have learned to understand that the painful emotions are mine, they belong to me, and in fact the other person has done me a service by reflecting back to me my unresolved wounds. If you work with this attitude, it really is a gift, a blessing rather than a violation of some sort.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real. Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is